talking about here on my channel right now. It's all about Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively's.
Hollywood has always sold the illusion of perfection, but beneath its glittering lights lies a world fueled by control, manipulation, and emotional warfare. And no modern saga captures that better than the silent storm between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. On paper, they were two creative minds joining forces on a passion project. A romantic drama meant to inspire, to heal, to humanize. But in reality, it became the stage for one of Hollywood's most intricate psychological and reputational battles, where power didn't roar. It whispered through smiles, legal filings, and studio leaks. What began as a collaboration evolved into a quiet war, with both sides weaponizing silence, sympathy, and public perception. And as that battle unfolded, it exposed something much bigger than either of them. It revealed how Hollywood manipulates narratives not through truth, but through the timing and framing of who gets to speak first. When news broke that a judge wanted Blake Lively to release secret audio allegedly tied to her dispute with Baldoni, it wasn't just legal drama. It was the unraveling of Hollywood's most sacred illusion, that image can protect you from consequence. The audio, according to insiders, isn't just sound. It's sentiment, tone, evidence of emotion and manipulation that can't be easily spun. And that's what terrifies everyone in the Hollywood ecosystem, because in an industry where reputation is currency, emotion is often the most dangerous proof. Blake Lively, a woman long defined by control and composure, suddenly found herself surrounded by speculation about what she said, how she said it, and what she might have meant between the lines. She's known for her carefully constructed public identity, the witty Instagram captions, the effortless family photos, the deliberate refusal to show chaos. Her brand is calm, golden, steady. But the courtroom doesn't care for branding, and when legal truth starts to unseal what PR once sealed shut, the line between authenticity and artifice begins to collapse. Justin Baldoni, meanwhile, the man once framed as Hollywood's emotional ally, found himself painted as both victim and villain in the same breath. His public persona, the director with heart, the actor turned philosopher, the advocate for vulnerability, started to fracture under the weight of Blake's silence. Because in the modern media cycle, silence is strategy. When one speaks too soon, they risk revealing weakness. When one waits too long, they lose control of the story. But Blake Lively played a dangerous middle ground. She neither denied nor confirmed. She simply let the narrative twist around her. And as public curiosity grew, so did the pressure on the court, the fans, and the creators who live off commentary, people like us, to find the meaning beneath the surface. This isn't just celebrity gossip, it's the anatomy of power. The way studios protect assets, how PR firms rewrite morality into marketability, and how fan bases evolve into digital armies. Hollywood isn't a place, it's an ecosystem, and this ecosystem feeds on controversy as much as it fears it. Every click, every view, every breaking news headline becomes currency in the game of reputation. But what happens when the game outgrows the players? When a story meant to be silenced finds new life through the very platforms built to promote them. That's what's happening right now with the alleged Blake Lively audio. The same social media machines that once worshipped her perfection now demand her imperfection. People want truth, not the polished, scripted truth of interviews, but the raw, messy, human truth that can't be edited out. It's not about who's right or wrong anymore. It's about who sounds more real. And in the war of perception, reality is often the first casualty. CoreVanta commentary has always said it. Hollywood doesn't destroy people overnight. It slowly disassembles them under the illusion of progress. When a narrative begins to crumble, every old clip, every interview, every public smile becomes evidence. Fans become detectives. Algorithms become judges. And the very audience that made you famous becomes the crowd that calls for your exposure. Blake's situation mirrors a dangerous trend in Hollywood right now, the fall of the untouchable. From Kim Kardashian's public fatigue to Kat Stickler's heartbreak going viral, to even Taylor Swift's shifting media control, the cultural appetite has turned toward real emotion, and that's where the risk lies. When everything becomes content, the line between justice and entertainment starts to blur. So when a judge unseals secret audio, it doesn't just reveal sound. It opens a gate for millions to interpret, to debate, to exploit. It transforms legal evidence into emotional spectacle. And Hollywood, being the master of spectacle, knows exactly how to survive inside it by turning truth into storyline. To understand this feud, you have to understand the ecosystem that fuels it. Every celebrity, every influencer, every commentator operates within a web of mutually dependent illusion. Studios feed the media feeds the audience feeds outrage, and outrage feeds revenue. It's not evil, it's efficient. But it's also dangerous, because once emotion becomes monetized, empathy becomes optional. Justin Baldoni's image of compassion began to feel performative once the internet started comparing his public sensitivity to private allegations of manipulation. Meanwhile, Blake's polished silence began to feel strategic, not serene. Together, they represented the duality of modern fame. One built on feeling, one built on control, and both collapsing under the weight of their own curation. When the legal system steps in, the performance is forced to stop. That's what makes this case so compelling. For once, no amount of charisma, PR, or fan management can decide what happens next. The judge's demand for transparency is a rare moment where the machine of Hollywood pauses to look at itself. But here's the uncomfortable truth. This isn't really about Blake or Justin anymore. It's about the power of narrative ownership in an age where every story becomes public property. The court might unseal audio, but the public will unseal judgment. And once that judgment begins, there's no PR team powerful enough to reframe it. The truth becomes the version that trends. It doesn't matter if it's real. It matters if it resonates. Blake knows that. Justin knows that. Every influencer and brand deal in Hollywood knows that. And that's why the silence from both sides isn't just legal, it's tactical. Each waiting for the other to blink first, each trying to predict the rhythm of public outrage before it explodes. But the internet doesn't wait. It decides. It devours. And once it does, the human beings at the center of the story stop being people. They become archetypes. Heroes, villains, victims, liars. Labels sell faster than truth, and once they stick, they rarely come off. So here we are again, watching another Hollywood morality play unfold, except this one feels heavier, sharper, and more symbolic than the rest. Because this isn't about fame lost, it's about illusion broken. The Blake Lively, who once represented balance, elegance, and family-first values, now faces a narrative she can't filter through lifestyle branding. And Justin Baldoni, the man who once represented emotional enlightenment, finds himself questioned on whether his empathy was authentic or opportunistic. It's Shakespeare with smartphones. It's image versus evidence. And it's all happening in real time, with the entire digital world watching. What began as a private disagreement now sits in the court of global opinion, where every like, comment, and retweet carries weight. The Hollywood machine knows this, and it's already working overtime to decide which narrative wins. Will the system protect Blake like it has protected countless stars before her? Or will the age of unfiltered accountability finally catch up with even the most controlled personas? That's the question we'll explore in the next chapter of the saga. How the ecosystem reacts when its own foundations start to shake, and what happens when power meets exposure in a world addicted to both. For Blake Lively, this wasn't her first dance with public image management, but it was by far the most dangerous. The stakes were no longer limited to the narrative of a misunderstood creative dispute. Now, there was a legal document, an audio file, and the risk of emotional exposure. PR professionals live in terror of three things: visuals, voices, and verifiable records. Visuals can be reframed, documents can be reworded, but voices, they linger. Tone and hesitation, size and inflection, laughter in inappropriate places, those things are harder to spin. That's why the moment the judge ordered the release, Hollywood froze. Because suddenly, the most powerful currency in the industry, control, was under threat. And in a city built on image, losing control is worse than losing money. Behind closed doors, the agencies that represent Blake were already working through playbooks. Isolate the damage, humanize the client, redirect the conversation. One faction pushed for emotional vulnerability, let her appear as someone misunderstood, not manipulative. Another faction wanted silence. If she speaks now, she gives it legitimacy. The irony? Both sides were right, and both could destroy her depending on timing. Meanwhile, Justin Baldoni's camp saw opportunity. They knew that in the public imagination, perception doesn't depend on evidence. It depends on emotion. If Blake's audio sounded cold, detached, or rehearsed, that would be enough to shift sympathy, regardless of what was said. So his team began shaping the emotional prelude, planting narratives about authentic pain and male vulnerability under pressure. They understood something critical about modern audiences. They don't crave justice, they crave relatability. And relatability sells faster than truth. But what made the situation more volatile was that neither side was entirely innocent in the PR war. Blake's allies had been quietly seeding stories of her professionalism, motherhood, and dignity, painting her as a woman unfairly dragged into male ego warfare. Baldoni's allies countered with the language of spiritual betrayal, framing him as the emotionally honest artist crushed by industry manipulation. The court case had become a mirror for every cultural conversation: gender, power, empathy, ambition. The lines blurred until nobody remembered what the original dispute was even about. It became a referendum on who America wanted to believe more. The PR ecosystem in Hollywood operates like a living organism. Every part feeds another. When a scandal breaks, publicists feed soundbites to journalists, journalists feed outrage to social media, and social media feeds data back to advertisers, who then feed money into platforms that amplify the very content that caused the scandal. It's an ecosystem where controversy is both crisis and commodity. CoreVanta has seen this pattern unfold countless times. The redemption arc of Johnny Depp, the fall and rise of Kim Kardashian's brand, even the weaponized sympathy behind Meghan Markle's coverage. All of it runs on the same algorithmic pulse. Blake's situation simply revealed how automated the system has become. Within hours of the court's decision, AI-generated thumbnails, TikTok commentary clips, and insider reels began trending across platforms. Each one amplified her name. Each one monetized her scandal. The world was consuming her downfall like content, while her PR team scrambled to make sure it didn't become permanent. That's the terrifying beauty of digital fame. It's elastic, but never forgetful. You can stretch it, rebrand it, bury it, but you can't erase it. Inside talent agencies, meetings stretched into the early morning hours. PR executives dissected public sentiment metrics from X, Reddit, and YouTube, calculating whether sympathy leaned toward Blake or Justin. They analyzed language. Was Blake betrayed, trending higher than Blake exposed? Was Justin emotional, being interpreted as strength or instability? Every keyword became a clue in a war of perception. You see, modern PR isn't about controlling the press anymore. It's about controlling the algorithm. The audience doesn't read press releases. They read headlines and hashtags. So the PR firms adapt by playing chess with SEO. They flood Google with counter-narratives, bury unfavorable clips under newer, shinier ones, and use paid micro-influencers to shift tone without looking corporate. And it works because to the average viewer, repetition equals credibility. If you see 5 different creators saying Blake Lively was unfairly targeted, your brain begins to accept it as fact. That's how modern myth-making happens, not through power, but through pattern. And yet, in the midst of this digital war, something raw began to happen. People started to feel fatigued, not just with Blake and Justin, but with the entire system. The endless PR cycles, the recycled apologies, the Notes app confessions, the staged tears on talk shows, it all began to feel synthetic. This fatigue is dangerous for Hollywood because attention is its oxygen. When the audience gets bored, even scandals stop selling. That's when the PR machine doubles down, often using desperation disguised as authenticity. Expecting sympathy, they overexpose the human side. Expecting empathy, they script vulnerability. But genuine emotion cannot be manufactured, and the more Hollywood tries, the less believable it becomes. Blake's team sensed this too. So they began pulling back, removing the excess polish, allowing slight imperfections to surface. Messy hair, tired eyes, pauses in speech. All tiny cues designed to make her appear human again. It's a paradox of celebrity survival. You have to look like you're breaking without actually breaking. Justin, on the other hand, leaned into the chaos. His content strategy became the antithesis of hers, unguarded, unscripted, occasionally erratic. He gave interviews with too much heart, shared reflections that felt too personal, and in doing so, attracted both empathy and suspicion. To his fans, he was real. To his critics, he was performative. But that was exactly the point. He didn't need to be universally liked. He just needed to be emotionally relevant. The PR world calls this the resonance pivot. When you can't win the narrative, you outfeel it. You become the emotional heartbeat of the story, ensuring that even your flaws keep you in circulation.
And it worked.
Engagement rose. His name, once overshadowed by bigger scandals, now commanded its own algorithmic gravity. Meanwhile, Blake's restraint began to feel eerie, even ominous. The absence of her voice became louder than any statement she could have made. And that's when whispers began circulating. What if the audio, once released, didn't just incriminate, it redefined her entirely? This fear became the core of the ecosystem's unrest. You could sense it across the industry. The dread that the release of something so small, so seemingly simple as a voice clip, could unravel the delicate fabric of control everyone depends on. Because if Blake Lively, the embodiment of Hollywood composure, could lose grip of her narrative, what did that mean for anyone else? For influencers, actors, executives, it was a wake-up call. The illusion of control was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. The PR machine, though still running, began to flicker. Journalists questioned their sources. Editors second-guessed anonymous quotes. Even fans started wondering if they were complicit in a system that profits from destruction. It wasn't just a scandal anymore. It was an existential moment for Hollywood. Hollywood's relationship with truth. As this phase unfolded, CoreVanta's role became clear. Not to pick sides, but to decode the signals behind the spectacle. Because every scandal tells you something about the society that consumes it. Blake's case tells us that we've reached a cultural tipping point. We crave transparency, but punish vulnerability. We worship authenticity, but reward performance. We want celebrities to be human, but only the kind of human that fits our narrative. That contradiction keeps the machine alive. The PR strategists know this, the studios exploit it, and the audiences sustain it. The real ecosystem isn't Hollywood, it's us. And so, as the PR battleground rages on, one question looms larger than the rest. What happens when the truth finally comes out, and it's not cinematic? It's ordinary, human, and flawed? Will the world forgive it? Or will the machine simply find a new story to devour? That's the crossroads where Blake Lively now stands, not between innocence and guilt, but between illusion and exposure. And the industry watches, terrified, knowing that whichever way she falls, something in Hollywood's The day the audio was released felt less like news and more like a cultural event, a collective pause in which every screen on Earth seemed to tilt toward the same question. What did she say? It began quietly, a court clerk's digital upload time-stamped at dawn, a routine procedural act that instantly detonated through 100 group chats, newsrooms, and algorithmic feeds. Within minutes, snippets of the file, 30 seconds here, 15 seconds there, were circulating like contraband, each one stripped of context but drenched in interpretation. The sound was ordinary, voices overlapping, the rustle of paper a sigh, a hesitation that social media would later slow down and replay as if decoding a national secret. But the ordinariness itself became the scandal. For years, Blake Lively's image had existed in a vacuum of perfection, composed, elegant, almost post-humanly graceful, and now, the world could hear her as a person. Not a brand, not a character, a person. And that human sound, raw and unedited, broke the spell that Hollywood had spent decades perfecting. The first reaction online was disbelief. The second was analysis. Every influencer with a microphone became a body language expert. Every podcast host a moral philosopher. The internet's courtroom was in session, and empathy had no scheduled appearance. Mainstream media joined the frenzy with a choreography that felt rehearsed. Breaking news graphics, expert legal analysts, panel discussions about privacy and consent. But underneath the polite language of journalism was hunger. Hunger for engagement, for clicks, for the dopamine of scandal. The headlines were variations on a theme. Blake Lively speaks, the audio that changed everything. Inside the secret recording will crack forever. Yet none of them addressed the real story. Not what she said, but why we cared so much. Because the truth is, the content of the recording was underwhelming. There was no confession, no crime, no clear villain. It was simply two powerful people navigating a crumbling collaboration, their frustrations leaking through controlled tones. And yet, the public treated it like revelation, because what mattered wasn't the words, it was the permission to judge. Humanity had become spectacle again, and the audience, conditioned by years of reality television and influencer drama, demanded a plot twist even when none existed. Justin Baldoni's camp understood this immediately. Within hours, they positioned him as the composed observer, the one caught in emotional crossfire. His social posts were minimal but pointed, quotes about truth, patience, integrity. To his fans, he looked like the wounded visionary. To Blake's supporters, a manipulative opportunist. Either way, the engagement was astronomical. Blake's team responded with silence, strategic, deliberate, maddening silence. In PR terms, it was both risky and brilliant. The absence of her voice forced the media to fill the gap, and speculation became oxygen. What was she thinking? Was she embarrassed, betrayed, or just done? The longer she remained quiet, the louder the noise grew. Comment sections mutated into moral tribunals. Think piece writers debated feminism and fame. Reddit threads dissected audio frequencies, as if decoding guilt. Even other celebrities, sensing relevance, weighed in with veiled tweets about truth and respect. Hollywood, addicted to momentum, had found its new obsession. Yet behind the scenes, something more profound was happening. Executives, publicists, and actors began to whisper about the fragility of their own curated lives. If Blake Lively, poster child of privacy, master of narrative, could have her authenticity hijacked by a single leak, then no one was safe. The illusion of control had evaporated. The emotional fallout was swift and brutal. Fan accounts that once celebrated her fashion now posted slow-motion clips of her interviews, searching for hidden arrogance. Others defended her fiercely, reframing her as the victim of misogynistic curiosity. The discourse wasn't about Blake anymore. It was about everyone's projection of themselves. That's what modern scandal does. It becomes a mirror. Justin Baldoni's message about holding space for discomfort trended for 48 hours before being remixed into satire. Sympathy had a half-life shorter than a TikTok sound. The culture that demanded vulnerability now mocked it for profit. Even networks that once courted both stars began to quietly shift distance, editing promotional materials, delaying releases, pretending neutrality, while secretly running analytics to measure brand safety. The industry had entered crisis containment mode, but this time, the contagion wasn't scandal, it was awareness. Everyone could now see how mechanical the system was, how predictable the outrage cycle had become. The transparency people demanded had finally arrived, and it looked uglier than anyone expected. Amid the chaos, the court issued clarifications, lawyers released statements, and the original legal issue was technically resolved, but by then, it didn't matter. The legal victory was irrelevant. The cultural verdict had already been rendered by millions of strangers who'd heard 10 seconds of edited sound. This is how modern justice operates in the fame economy. Whoever controls the narrative timing controls the perception of truth. And timing was never on Blake's side. Every pause she took, every delay her team implemented, was filled by the internet with interpretations that stuck like concrete. She became a symbol of privilege, then a symbol of victimhood, then a symbol of Hollywood hypocrisy. Curiosity
All
in
within
an
a
age
single
where
news cycle.
transparency has no boundaries and empathy has no patience. The audio ended, the noise didn't. And somewhere in that endless hum of opinion, Hollywood learned the oldest lesson it keeps forgetting. Every illusion has an expiration date. When the storm finally subsided, what remained wasn't clarity but echo, a kind of post-scandal silence that vibrated beneath the surface of every red carpet smile and every studio boardroom meeting. Hollywood moved as it always does, forward, polished, pretending not to limp. But for those who'd watched the Blake Lively v. Justin Baldoni saga unfold, there was no going back to the illusion of harmony. The recording had exposed something that could not be unseen: the ecosystem itself, how reputations were currency, how perception was the true profit, and how audiences had become co-investors in celebrity collapse. The media called it a reset, but inside the system it felt more like a reckoning. Agents whispered about new transparency protocols, lawyers quietly redrafted NDAs, and every publicist in Los Angeles began preaching crisis control as a lifestyle. Blake retreated into what the tabloids dubbed strategic absence, a phrase that perfectly encapsulated the contradiction of modern fame. Even silence must be managed. Justin, on the other hand, leaned into discourse. Podcasts, long captions, carefully vulnerable interviews, but each word was weighed against suspicion. The public had evolved. It no longer believed sincerity at face value. Authenticity had become an algorithmic product, optimized, monetized, and ultimately hollowed. For months, Hollywood's gossip cycle spun in withdrawal. The audience that had consumed every frame of the feud now felt hungover, guilty, fatigued. They demanded truth and gotten noise, demanded justice and gotten clicks. The very same feeds that once amplified scandal now flooded with self-care posts, as if collective exhaustion could be aestheticized. But beneath the digital detox, something profound simmered: awareness. People began to recognize how every scandal was structured: the leak, the outrage, the reaction, the redemption arc. The formula was ancient, yet newly transparent. And once you see the formula, you can't unsee it. That's what made the Blake-Justin saga historic. It taught the audience how the show worked. Even the gossip blogs, usually immune to introspection, began writing about media accountability. For a brief, fragile moment, the culture glimpsed its reflection and flinched. Blake's comeback, when it came, was quiet. No televised apology, no emotional tell-all, just a simple appearance at a charity gala months later. Cameras caught her walking past reporters, smiling but not speaking. That restraint became its own statement. Commentators called it mastery of absence, a reminder that sometimes power survives through stillness. What fascinated analysts was not what she said, but what she didn't, how she refused to feed the algorithm that once devoured her. It was a silent rebranding of humanity itself. Imperfections accepted, control reclaimed. Justin's trajectory mirrored the opposite. He spoke too much. Every new quote reignited old debates. His attempt to intellectualize pain was honest, yet self-defeating. In the digital arena, nuance is indistinguishable from deflection. He learned, perhaps too late, that vulnerability cannot coexist with virality. By the time he withdrew, the narrative had moved on, but the scars remained, not on his reputation, but on the culture that weaponized it. Inside the industry, executives began holding closed-door sessions labeled narrative management workshops. They studied the scandal like a case file. What triggered the backlash? How quickly did audiences turn? Which platforms sustained engagement the longest? The entertainment business had always been about storytelling, but now the story was data. Scandal became an analytics category, redemption, a marketing KPI. Yet amid all that quantification, one uncomfortable truth persisted: humanity doesn't scale. The ecosystem could measure clicks but not consequences, sentiment but not sincerity. The Blake-Justin conflict had revealed the limit of performance, that even in an age obsessed with exposure, some things shouldn't be content. Younger actors watched the fallout with both fear and fascination. They learned that visibility was a form of vulnerability, that the same audience that crowns you today can cancel you tomorrow, and that survival requires emotional armor disguised as relatability. Fame had never looked lonelier. By the 1-year mark, the saga had mutated into myth. Documentaries were pitched, think pieces anthologized, and film schools began teaching the case as an example of digital ethics. The scandal that once divided Hollywood now served as its mirror. Blake became a symbol of restraint, Justin of sincerity misread, and the industry as a whole of spectacle fatigue. But beneath that symbolism lay the more interesting evolution. The audience had matured. The chaos had taught them discernment. They no longer wanted perfect heroes or flawless narratives. They wanted truth with edges, stories that bled a little. In a paradoxical way, the scandal had humanized not just its players, but the spectators themselves. It reintroduced empathy to an economy that had forgotten how to feel without performing. CoreVanta's final commentary framed it perfectly. What happened between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni wasn't a feud. It was a feedback loop. It showed us how fame feeds on belief, how morality becomes merchandising, and how every viewer is part of the machine. That statement became the thesis for Hollywood's self-reflection phase. Studios began hiring narrative ethicists, influencers started disclosing emotional sponsorships, and audiences, more skeptical yet more engaged, began curating their own moral timelines. The concept of privacy didn't return, but its absence was at least acknowledged. And acknowledgement, in a culture built on denial, felt revolutionary. In the end, neither Blake nor Justin emerged victorious. Victory implies closure, and this story never truly ended. It simply transformed into collective caution. Their names became shorthand for a shift, from spectacle to self-awareness, from outrage to observation. Blake found a quieter strength, using her silence as commentary. Justin redirected his energy into activism, accepting that perception cannot be controlled, only endured. And Hollywood, the eternal shapeshifter, learned that transparency is not the enemy of glamour but its evolution. The old power structures, studio dominance, PR manipulation, curated mystery, had cracked. What replaced them was messy, unpredictable, but undeniably more human. The real epilogue, though, belongs to the audience. They were the ones who held up the mirror and saw themselves in every accusation, every defense, every viral edit. The Blake Lively v. Justin Baldoni ecosystem wasn't about two celebrities. It was about the ecosystem itself. How attention became a currency, how empathy became conditional, and how truth became entertainment. And in recognizing that, maybe, just maybe, the culture took a step toward healing. Because the only way to detox from spectacle is to remember that behind every headline is a heartbeat. That's the story Hollywood forgot, and the one it keeps rediscovering, one scandal at a time.